Many years ago I was at a convenience store in Holton, Maine, wearing my Vimy Ridge hat in celebration of my family members, friends, and my extended colleagues' family who served at Vimy Ridge, considered one of the greatest battles ever in the history of warfare, made Canada united as a nation. The guy questioned it because he said to my face, "The Canadians ever fought in the First World War?" I said, "Yeah, well, we won Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele, all the big battles." And I said, "Well, why is there this big monument in France with the big, skyscraper marble statue in tribute to all the Canadian soldiers?" He said, "You're a liar. All Canadians are cowards. You're a bunch of communists." Well, I said, "I think you're full of shit, sir, and I think you should leave before I have you arrested for promoting hate speech." So this podcast is dedicated to this complete and utter American asshole. You see, with a lot of Americans, they think they know something on military victories, but I tell you something, the Vimy Ridge was a complete and utter success because the Canadians that were there made it happen. A lot of lives were lost, and there's no glory in warfare. Well, the only glory is to basically end the war and fight for the peace. Now, the Battle of Vimy Ridge was part of the Battle of Arras in the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region of France during, again, the First World War. The main combatants were the 4 divisions of the Canadian Corps in the First Army against 3 divisions of the German Sixth Army. The battle took place, the main one, between April 9th and 12th, 1917, at the beginning of the Battle of Arras, the first attack of the Nivelle Offensive, which was intended to attract German reserves from the French before the French attempted at a decisive offensive on the Anse and Chemin de Dam ridge further south several days later. Now, 4 Canadian divisions, 1 British division, 170,000 Allied men. Now, the Germans had 3 divisions, or the German Empire, 30 to 45,000 men. Now, the Canadian Corps was to capture the German-held high ground, again at Vimy Ridge, and escarpment on the northern flank of the Arras front. This would protect the First Army and the Third Army fired themselves from German fire. Supported by a creeping barrage, the Canadian Corps captured most of the ridge during the first day. The village of Telles fell during the second day, as did the crest of the ridge, once the Canadian Corps overran the salient against considerable German resistance. The final objective, a fortified knoll outside the village of Givenchy-en-Gaule, fell to the Canadians on April 12th. The Sixth Army then retreated to the Oppy-Murray Corps line. Now, historians attribute the success of the Canadian Corps to technical and tactical innovation, meticulous planning, powerful artillery support, and extensive training, as well as the inability of the Sixth Army to properly apply the new German defensive doctrine. The battle was the first occasion when the 4 divisions of the Canadian Expeditionary Force fought together and was made a symbol of Canadian national achievement and sacrifice. A 100-hectare, 250-acre portion of the former battleground serves as a memorial site of the Canadian National Vimy Memorial. Now, the Canadians that served there represented all parts of Canada, but what I found really interesting, the maritime lumberjacks, fishermen, and farmers that fought the ridge that day, their resilience and the amount of weather that they had to battle, because it was pretty cold and chilly that day. They were mentally a little bit tougher than the Germans, and it paid out. Now, Vimy itself is an escarpment 8 kilometers northeast of Arras on the western edge of the Douai Plain. The ridge rises gradually on its western side and drops more quickly on the eastern side. At approximately 7 kilometers in length and culminating at an elevation of 145 meters, or 60 meters above the Douai Plains, the ridge provides a natural, unobstructed view for tens of kilometers in all directions. The ridge fell under German control on October 14 during the race to the sea, as the Franco-British and German forces continually attempted to outflank each other through northeastern France. The French 10th Army attempted to dislodge the Germans from the region during the Second Battle of Artois in May 1915 by attacking their positions at Vimy and Notre-Dame-de-Rolette. The French 1st Moroccan Division managed to briefly capture the height of the ridge, but was unable to hold it owing to a lack of reinforcements. The French made another attempt during the Third Battle of Artois in September 15, but they only captured the village of Souchez at the western base of the ridge. The Vimy sector calmed following the offensive, with both sides taking a largely live and let live approach. the French suffered approximately 150,000 casualties in their attempts to gain control of Vimy and surrounding territory. Now, the British 17th Corps, led by Lieutenant General Sir Julian Byng, relieved the French 10th Army in the sector in February 16, permitting the French to expand their operations at Verdun. The British soon discovered that German tunneling companies had taken advantage of the relative calm of the surface to build an extensive network of tunnels and deep mines for which they would attack French positions by setting off explosive charges underneath their trenches. The Royal Engineers immediately deployed specialist tunneling companies along the front to combat the German mining operations. In response to the increased British mining aggression, German artillery and trench mortar fire intensified in early May 16. On 21 May 16, after shelling both forward trenches and divisional artillery positions from 80 hidden batteries on a reserve slope of the ridge, the German infantry began Unterland Schleswig-Holstein, an attack on the British lines along a 2,000-yard front to eject them from positions along the ridge. The Germans captured several British-controlled tunnels and mine craters before halting their advance and digging in. Small counterattacks by units of the 140th and 141st Brigades took place on May 22nd, but did not manage to change the situation. The Canadian Corps relieved 4 corps along the western slopes of Vimy in October. Now, they were setting up a formal assault plan which was adopted in early March 1917. Now, they drew heavily on the briefings of staff officers sent to learn from an experience of the French army during Verdun, the big battle there. Now, for the first time before the battle started, the 4 Canadian divisions would fight together. The nature and size of the attack needed more resources than the Canadian Corps would possess, so the British 5th Division, artillery, engineer, and labour units were attached to the Corps, bringing the nominal strength of the Canadian Corps to about 170,000 men, of whom 97,184 were Canadian. Now, a tactical plan was drawn up starting in January 1917. Now, the German defense was quite strong at Vimy because the topography of the Vimy battlefield made defense in depth difficult to realize. The ridge was 700 meters wide at its narrowest point, with a steep drop on the eastern side, all but eliminating the possibility of counterattacks if the ridge was captured. The Germans were apprehensive about the inherent weakness of the Vimy Ridge defensive, as the German defensive scheme was to maintain a front line defense of sufficient strength to defend against initial assault and move operational reserves forward. As a result, the German defense of Vimy Ridge relied largely on machine guns, which acted as force multipliers for the defending infantry. Now, the artillery of the Canadian Corps was quite strong. As 1.6 million shell allotment allowed the artillery along the Canadian Corps front to maintain a high sustained rate of fire. Improvements in the quality of the shells compared to those used early in the war ensued fewer deaths. The introduction of instantaneous number 106 fuse greatly improved the effectiveness of the artillery, since this fuse bursts reliably with the slightest of contact. Now, training, preparation, all this led to what was going on, including air operations. Now, what was the preliminary attack was the big thing which kind of determined how quick the big attack was going to happen. Foreign intelligence gathered by the Germans, big Allied trench raids, and troop concentrations seen west of Arras made it clear to the Germans that a spring offensive in the area was being prepared. In February 1917, a German-born Canadian soldier deserted, we don't know his name, and helped confirm many of the suspicions held by the Germans, providing them with a great deal of useful information. By March 1917, the 6th Army knew that an offensive was imminent and would include operations aimed at capturing Vimy Ridge. Now, preliminary artillery began on March 20th with a systematic 2-week bombardment of German batteries, trenches, and strong points. They paid particular attention to eliminating German barbed wire, a task made easier with the introduction again of the 106 fuse. Only half the artillery fired at once, and the intensity of the barrage was varied to confuse the Germans about Canadian intentions. Phase 2 lasted a week beginning April 2nd and employed all the guns supporting the Canadian Corps, massing the equivalent of a heavy gun for every 20 yards and a field gun for every 10 yards. The German soldiers came referred to the week before the attack as the week of suffering. In the German account, their trenches and defensive works were almost completely demolished. The health and morale of the Germans suffered from the stress of remaining at the ready for 11 straight days under extremely heavy artillery bombardment. Compounding German difficulties was the inability of ration parties to bring food to the front lines. The old Napoleon trick. Now, on 3rd of April, General Falkenhausen of the German troops ordered reserve divisions to prepare to relieve frontline divisions over the course of a long, drawn-out defensive battle in a manner similar to the Battle of the Somme, and the divisions were kept 24 kilometers from the battlefield to avoid being shelled. Now, the attack was to begin on 5:30 a.m. on Easter Monday, April 9th. The attack was originally planned for the morning of April 8th, but was postponed for 24 hours at the request of the French. During the late hours of April 8th and early morning of April 9th, the men of the leading and supporting wave of the attack were moved into reform and assembly positions. The weather was extremely cold and later changed to sleet and snow, typical maritime spring weather. Although physically discomforting for everyone, the northwesterly storm provided some advantage to the assaulting troops by blowing snow in the faces of the defending troops. Light Canadian and British artillery bombardments continued throughout the night, but stopped in a few minutes before the attack, as the artillery recalibrated their guns in preparation for the synchronized barrage. At 5:30 a.m., every artillery piece at disposal of the Canadian Corps began firing. 30 seconds later, engineers detonating the mine charges laid under no man's land in the German trench line, destroying a number of German strong points and creating secure communication trenches directly across no man's land. Now, a field guns laid down a barrage that mostly advanced at a rate of 100 yards in 3 minutes, while medium and heavy howitzers established a series of standing barrages further ahead against known defensive systems. During the early fighting, the German divisional artilleries, despite many losses, were able to maintain their defensive firing. As the Canadian assault advanced, it overran many of the German guns because large numbers of their draught horses had been killed in the initial gas attack. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Canadian divisions reported reaching and capturing the first objective, the Black Line, by 6:25 a.m. The 4th Canadian Division encountered a great deal of trouble during its advance and was unable to complete its first objective until some hours later. After a planned pause, when the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd consolidated their positions, the advance resumed. Shortly after 7 a.m., the 1st Canadian captured the left half of the second objective, the Red Line, and moved the 1st Canadian Brigade forward to mount an attack on the remainder. The 2nd Canadian Division reporting reaching the Red Line and capturing the village of Les Tulles at approximately the same time. Now, a mine explosion that killed many German troops of Reserve Infantry Regiment 262 manning the front line preceded the advance of the 3rd. The remaining German troops could do no more than man temporary lines of resistance until later manning of full defense at the German 3rd line. As a result, the southern section of the 3rd Canadian Division was able to reach the Red Line at the western edge at Bois de Falaise around 7:30 a.m. At 9 a.m., the division learned of exposed left flank as the 4th Division had not captured Hill 145. The 3rd Canadian Division was thus called upon to establish a divisional defensive flank to its north. Although the German commanders were able to maintain open lines of communication and issue orders, even with swift staff work, the tempo of the assault was such that a German decision cycle was unable to react decisively. Now, the only portion of the Canadian assault that did not go as planned was the advance of the fort, collapsing almost immediately after exiting their trenches. The commanding officer of one of the assaulting battalions requested that the artillery leave a portion of German trench undamaged. Machine gun nests in the undamaged sections of the German line pinned down, wounded, or killed much of the 4th. The progress on the left flank was eventually impeded by harassing fire from the Pimple that was made worse when the creeping barrage got too far ahead of the advancing troops. In view of the German defense, the fort did not attempt a further frontal assault throughout the afternoon. Now, reserve units from the fort came forward and once again attacked the German positions at the top of the ridge. Persistent attacks eventually forced the German troops holding the southwest portion of Hill 145 to withdraw, but only after they had run out of ammunition, mortar rounds, and grenades. Towards midday, the 79th Reserve Division was ordered to recapture the portion of the third line lost during the progression of the Canadian attack. However, it was not until 6 p.m. that the force was able to organize a counterattack, clearing the Canadian Corps troops out of the ruined village of Vimy, but not recapturing the third line south of the village. By nighttime, the German forces holding the top of the ridge believed he had overcome the immediate crisis for the time being. Additional German reinforcements began arriving, and by late evening portions of the 111th Infantry Division occupied the third line near Asheville and Arlo, with the remainder of the division arriving the following day. Now, the British moved 3 fresh brigades up to the Red Line by 9:30 am on 10th April to support the advance of the 1st and 2nd, whereupon they were to leapfrog existing units occupying the Red Line and advance to the Blue Line. Fresh units, including 2 sections of tanks and the 13th British Brigade, were called up from reserve to support the advance of the 2nd Canadian. By 11 a.m., the Blue Line, including Hill 135, the village of Telos, had been captured. To permit the troops time to consolidate the Blue Line, the advance halted and the barrage remained stationary for 90 minutes while machine guns were brought forward. Shortly before 1 p.m., the advance recommenced with both the 1st and 2nd reporting their final objective. The tanks supported the advance via Farbus and directed to the rear of the 79th Reserve was eventually halted by concentrated German fire short of the village. The Canadian 1st and 2nd were nonetheless able to secure the Brown Line by 2 p.m. Now, the 4th Canadian Division had made an attempt to capture the northern half of Hill 145 around 3:15 p.m., briefly capturing the peak before a German counterattack retook the position. The Germans occupying the small salient on the ridge soon found themselves being attacked along their flanks by continuously reinforced Canadian Corps troops. When it became obvious that the position was completely outflanked and there was no prospect of reinforcement, the German troops pulled back. The German forces were evacuated off the ridge, with German artillery batteries moving west of the Vimy Bellevue Railway embankment to the Oppy-Mericourt line. By nightfall of 10 April, the only Canadian objective not yet achieved was the capture of the Pimple. Now, the 4th Canadian Division on April 12 faced difficulties at the start of the battle that forced a delayed assault on the Pimple until 12 April. The Pimple was initially defended by the 16th Bavarian Infantry Division, but the Canadian Corps' preliminary artillery bombardment leading up to assault on April 9th caused heavy casualties amongst its ranks. On April 11th, the 4th Guards Infantry Division first reinforced and then relieved effective 16 Bavarian Infantry Division units. The night before the attack, artillery harassed German positions while a gas section of Royal Engineers, employing Levin's projectors, fired more than 40 drums of gas directly into the village of Givenchy-en-Gaule to cause confusion. The defending German troops managed to drive back the initial Canadian assaults around 4 a.m. by using small arms fire. The 10th Canadian Brigade attacked once again at 5 a.m., this time supported by a significant amount of artillery and the 24th Division of I Corps to the north. The German defensive artillery fire was late and too light to cause the assaulting troops great difficulty, allowing the Canadian Corps to exploit wide gaps and break into German positions. The 10th Canadian Brigade, assisted by snow and a westerly wind, fought hastily in trained German troops that captured the entire Pimple by 6 p.m. Now, by nightfall of April 12, 1917, the Canadian Corps was in firm control of the ridge. The Corps suffered 10,602 casualties, 3,598 killed, and 7,000 wounded. Now, the German 6th Army suffered an unknown number of casualties, with approximately 4,000 men become prisoners of war. Now, following defeat, the Chief of the German General Staff, Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, ordered the Obsessor Heeresführung, Supreme Army Command, to conduct a court of inquiry into the defensive collapse of the Arras sector. The court concluded that the 6th Army headquarters had disregarded frontline commander reports, noting a possible imminent attack, and a result, reserve units were kept too far back to execute a timely and effective counterattack. The court concluded that the 6th Army commander, General Ludwig von Falkenhausen, failed to apply an elastic defense properly as espoused by the German defensive doctrine at the time. Instead, the defensive system was a series of unmoving strong points and static lines of resistance, which the Allied artillery isolated and destroyed. Now Hindenburg fired Falkenhausen from his command and transferred him to Belgium, where he served the remainder of the war as a governor-general. Now, the Germans did not see the capture of Vimy Ridge by the Canadian Corps as a loss. Contemporary German sources viewed the action, at worst, as a draw, given that no breakthrough occurred following the attack. The Germans did not attempt to recapture the ridge, even during the spring offensive, and it remained under British control until the end of the war. The loss of Vimy forced the Germans to reassess their defensive strategy in the area, instead of mounting a counterattack. They pursued a scorched policy and retreated to the Oppy Military Corps line. The failure of the French Nivelle offensive in a week after the Arras offensive placed pressure on Field Marshal Douglas Haig to keep the Germans occupied in the Arras sector to minimize French losses. The Canadian Corps participated in several of these actions, including the Battle of Arioux and the Third Battle of the Scarpe in late April and early May 1917. Now, after the end of World War I, Byng was raised to the peerage as Baron Byng of Vimy, of Thorpe le Luc, Soken in the county of Essex, on 7 October 1919. The next month, he retired from the military. Now, 4 members of the Canadian Corps received the Victoria Cross, the highest military decoration awarded to British and Commonwealth forces for valor for their actions during the battle, including Private William Johnston Milne of the 16th Canadian Scottish Battalion, Lance Sergeant Ellis Wilwood Sifton, 18th Western Ontario Battalion, Private John George Patterson, 50th Calgary Battalion, and Captain Thane Weldon McDowell of the 38th Ottawa Battalion. Now, at least 2 orders pour le mérite, the Kingdom of Prussia's highest military order, were awarded to German commanders for their actions during the battle. Now, the Battle of Vimy Ridge has considerable significance again for Canadians. Although the battle is not generally considered the greatest achievement of the Canadian Corps, in strategic importance of results obtained, it was the first instance where all 4 Canadian divisions, made up troops drawn from all parts of the country, fought together. The image of national unity achieved is what, according to one of the many recent patriotic narratives, initially gave the battle importance for Canada. According to Pierce, the historical reality of the battle has been reworked and reinterpreted in a conscious attempt to give purpose and meaning to an event that came to symbolize Canada's coming of age as a nation. Now, the Canadian national identity and nationhood were born out of the battle, in an opinion that in the late 20th century became widely held in military and general histories of Canada. McKay and Swift contend that the theory that Vimy Ridge is the source of Canada's rise as a nation is highly contested and developed in the later part of the 20th century, after those who had experienced the Great War had died. But in 1919, Hopkins had attributed to F.A. Mackenzie the recognition that Dominion, sharing the common burden, shall share the common direction of the Empire's war policy, and related Lloyd George's commitment that the Dominions will not again be engaged in wars without consultation. So, but the idea is, we were fighting independent country, but fighting as a British force. But this was our battle, and win or lose, we had to get the glory or the pain, as we say. Now, the Canadian National Vimy Memorial, again, is its largest and principal overseas war memorial. Located at the highest point of the Vimy Ridge, the memorial is dedicated to commemoration of the Battle of Vimy and the Canadian Expeditionary Force members killed during the First World War and those killed in France during the First World War with no known grave. France granted Canada perpetual use of the section of land at Vimy in 1922 for a battlefield park and memorial. A 100-hectare portion of the former battlefield is preserved as part of the memorial park that surrounds the monument. The grounds of the site are still honeycombed with wartime tunnels, trenches, craters, and unexploded munitions, and are largely closed for public safety. A section of preserved trenches and a portion of a tunnel have been made accessible to visitors. Now, the memorial was designed by Toronto architect and sculptor Walter Seymour Allward, who described it as a sermon against the futility of war. It took 11 years and cost $1.7 million, or $23 million in present terms, to build. The unveiling was conducted on July 26, 36 by King Edward VIII, accompanied by President Albert Lebrun of France and a crowd of 50,000 people, including at least 6,200 Canadian veterans and their families. Now, Canadian Prime Minister Mackenzie King was absent at the ceremonies, it being well understood that he was reluctant to meet veterans and felt it was more appropriate for a royal veteran in cabinet to act as a minister in attendance. Edward VIII thanked France in both English and French for his generosity and assured those assembled that Canada would never forget his war missing and dead. A restoration project began in 2004, which included general cleaning and recarving of many inscribed names. Queen Elizabeth rededicated the restored monument on 9th April 2007 during a ceremony commemorating the 90th anniversary of the battle. Veterans Affairs Canada maintains a memorial site, of course, and a commemoration at the memorial on April 9, 2017 for the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy was attended by dignitaries including Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Governor General David Johnson, Charles, Prince of Wales, Prince William, Duke of Cambridge, Prince Harry, and President of France, Francois Hollande. Now, the idea about Vimy Ridge internationally is not really something that is high in the minds to many non-Canadians, but every Canadian, when November 11 comes along and we hear the last post, our thoughts go to Vimy, Dieppe, Passchendaele, Ortona, D-Day, the battle for Korea, for a lot of people, the Canadians who served in Vietnam, Afghanistan. But the Battle of Vimy Ridge, from a technical standpoint, it was a very, not say intellectual battle, but it shows how the French and German military trench warfare wasn't doing it. The Canadians believed in the modern warfare you saw in the Second World War was perfected by the Canadians at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, in my personal opinion. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a short history on the history of Vimy Ridge. If you like what we're doing here with our historical podcast, let us know with a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for listening. Bye.